In the oppressive heat of Burma's monsoon season during August 1944, American military forces stumbled upon something that would fundamentally alter their understanding of the Pacific War. The town of Mayit Kaina had endured more than 2 months of siege before falling to Allied control on the 10th day of that month. What soldiers discovered there went far beyond standard military intelligence, forcing them to document evidence of crimes that defied contemporary frameworks for understanding systematic abuse during wartime. Among the ruins and remnants of Japanese occupation, American personnel encountered 22 individuals whose presence would lead to the creation of one of the most significant pieces of wartime documentation regarding institutionalized sexual violence. 20 women from Korea and 2 Japanese civilians who had operated what the Imperial Japanese military euphemistically termed comfort facilities now stood before their liberators, their existence proof of a system that would take decades to fully comprehend and acknowledge. The Psychological Warfare Unit operating under the United States Office of War Information took on the task of interviewing these individuals. The resulting document, formally designated as Japanese Prisoner of War Interrogation Report No. 49, would become the initial official American record of what historians would eventually recognize as among the most extensive systems of organized sexual enslavement in the modern era. Through careful questioning and translation, interrogators began piecing together narratives that revealed the calculated machinery behind Japan's comfort system. The Korean women recounted how they had been drawn into this nightmare. Back in 1942, recruiters had arrived in their communities with promises of employment opportunities. Factory positions in Singapore, they were told, awaited young women willing to work for the war effort. The promise of wages and respectable labour convinced families struggling under colonial occupation to allow their daughters to accept these positions. Instead of Singapore's factories, however, these women found themselves transported through Rangoon to Burma's frontier regions, where the true nature of their employment became horrifically apparent. They were not labourers but captives, forced into sexual servitude for the Japanese military. The document that emerged from these interrogations, which would not see public release until 1973 when declassification finally occurred, contained meticulous details about every aspect of the comfort station system. Interrogators recorded information about daily living conditions, the operational structures governing these facilities, and the systematic approaches the Japanese military employed in maintaining what they clinically referred to as comfort stations. The euphemistic language concealed the brutal reality of organized rape carried out with military precision. Across the vast expanse of the Pacific Theater, American and Allied forces were encountering similar situations that challenged their capacity to comprehend what they were witnessing. The scholar Yoshimi Yoshiaki would dedicate years to researching this system, eventually documenting the existence of approximately 2,000 comfort stations distributed across territories ranging from mainland China to the Dutch East Indies. His research suggested that somewhere in the vicinity of 200,000 women had been subjected to this form of enslavement. From Burma's thick jungles to Manila's devastated urban landscape, from China's mountainous terrain to the scattered islands of Indonesia, Allied soldiers kept discovering women who had survived what amounted to sexual slavery implemented on an industrial scale. The documentation continued accumulating. Less than 30 days after the Mayit Kaina discovery, on September 7th of 1944, another crucial piece of evidence emerged from Songshan in China's Yunnan province. American and Chinese forces conducting joint operations against Japanese positions there successfully liberated Korean women who had been held in comfort facilities. A soldier named Private Charles H. Hatfield, serving with the 164th Signal Photo Company of the United States Army, captured photographic images that would prove invaluable for historical documentation decades later. His photographs showed 4 Korean women being led to safety by Chinese soldiers. One of the women was visibly pregnant, her condition stark testimony to the violence these women had endured. Another American serviceman, Sergeant Edward Fay, recorded motion picture footage of this same liberation event. Both the still photographs and the moving images were eventually archived within the United States National Archives, where they would remain as visual proof of the Comfort Women system's reality. The pregnant woman captured in those photographs would eventually be identified by name. Park Young-sim would wait 56 years before circumstances allowed her to speak publicly about what she had experienced. When she finally testified at the Women's International War Crimes Tribunal held in Tokyo during the year 2000, her testimony connected a face and identity to one of the war's most powerful images. Military records from Songshan revealed the deadly toll of these facilities. 24 comfort women had been at that location when Allied bombardment preceded the ground assault. Only 10 survived to see liberation. 14 others perished during the shelling that preceded the Allied advance. Intelligence gathering regarding the Comfort Women system fell primarily to a specialized unit known as the Allied Translator and Interpreter Section, commonly abbreviated as ATIS. Established on September 19th of 1942, this unit operated under Colonel Sidney F. Mashbeer, whose command would become synonymous with intelligence operations in the Pacific. By the time Japan surrendered in 1945, ATIS had expanded into a formidable organization employing nearly 4,000 personnel. The majority of these were Nisei, Americans of Japanese ancestry, whose language skills and cultural knowledge proved invaluable for processing the mountains of captured documents that revealed the administrative machinery underlying the sexual slavery system. One particular ATIS research product stands out for its comprehensive documentation. Research Report number 120 bore the bland title, Amenities in the Japanese Armed Forces, a descriptor that utterly failed to convey the report's actual content. Submitted directly to General MacArthur, this document provided what became the most thorough Allied documentation of the Comfort Women system compiled during the war years. The November 15, 1945 edition expanded significantly from an earlier February version, growing from 22 pages to 42 pages. This expansion reflected the inclusion of captured Japanese military regulations as annexes, primary source documents that detailed the operational procedures governing comfort stations. These materials found their permanent home in multiple record groups within the United States National Archives. Record groups 165, 331, 407, and 554 all contained relevant documentation. Initially, archivists classified these materials under the category of amusements rather than war crimes, a classification that reflected the contemporary understanding of these facilities and would take many decades to rectify. This categorization would have long-lasting implications for how comfort women were perceived and whether their experiences would be recognized as war crimes deserving prosecution. The captured regulations laid bare the standardized nature of comfort station operations across Japan's empire. One set of regulations from a facility in Nanjing called the Huayuelu Comfort Station, dated to March 6 of 1939, spelled out in bureaucratic detail the schedules for medical examinations, the fee structures that varied based on military rank, the designated operating hours, and mandatory requirements for condom usage. Mandalay Garrison Headquarters had issued 30 separate items of detailed regulations. These documents officially classified the women as licensed prostitutes while simultaneously maintaining strict military oversight of every aspect of their activities. Transportation records revealed the military's direct involvement in moving women to comfort stations. Army cargo ships transported women from Japan and Korea, with each shipment requiring specific permission from the Ministry of War. Railway transportation orders showed women being moved in freight cars marked as military supplies, their human cargo status concealed behind bureaucratic language. Every movement required multiple levels of approval, forms completed in triplicate, official seals and stamps, creating a paper trail that would survive even systematic attempts to destroy records at war's end. The language employed throughout these documents operated to systematically obscure reality. Personnel designated as special service workers were actually enslaved women. Comfort facilities were in fact rape stations. Medical treatment often referred to forced abortion procedures. The classification of systematic rape as amenities represented linguistic sanitization that would profoundly affect how comfort women were perceived and treated upon liberation. Many women fell through bureaucratic categories, classified as neither prisoners of war, civilian internees, nor military personnel, leaving them without clear status or entitlements under existing frameworks. The liberation of the Philippines, which unfolded between October 1944 and July 1945, exposed American forces to the most extensive network of comfort stations they would encounter anywhere in the Pacific Theater. When the 1st Cavalry Division of the United States Army made its rapid advance into Manila on February 3, 1945, racing to reach Santo Tomas University, where thousands of Allied civilian internees awaited rescue, the cavalry units passed through districts where comfort stations had operated continuously for 3 years under Japanese occupation. Records compiled by the Supreme Commander for the Allied Powers, known by the acronym SCAP, would eventually document 12 comfort stations and 5 brothels operating in Manila alone during the Japanese occupation. Additional facilities were discovered scattered across the entire Philippine archipelago as American forces advanced through the islands. Bayombong in North Luzon had comfort stations. Masbate in the central Visayas region contained facilities. The city of Iloilo on Panay Island housed 2 separate stations, one holding 12 to 16 women, another containing 10 to 11. Cebu had stations. Tacloban on Leyte operated a facility with 9 Filipino women. Butawan on Leyte had facilities. Butuan on Mindanao held 3 Filipino women. Cagayan on Mindanao contained 3 stations total. Davao on Mindanao housed facilities with comfort women of mixed nationalities. The 37th Infantry Division fought through brutal urban combat during the month-long Battle of Manila that would not conclude until March 3rd of 1945. Elements of that division, specifically the 148th Infantry Regiment, successfully liberated the Philippine General Hospital and University of the Philippines on February 17, 1945, freeing approximately 7,000 civilians who had taken refuge there. During these extensive operations throughout Manila's urban neighborhoods, American forces systematically discovered comfort stations in the Ermita, Malate, Binondo, and Quiapo districts. Financial documentation captured at the headquarters of the Japanese 14th Area Army revealed the economic exploitation that undergirded the entire system. Women were charged for their food, clothing, and medical treatment, with these costs consistently exceeding whatever meagre earnings they received, thereby creating permanent debt bondage. Military paymasters handled all financial transactions, ensuring that women never received actual currency. Payment vouchers showed that soldiers were charged fees based on their military rank, with privates paying 2 yen, non-commissioned officers paying 3 yen, and officers paying 4 yen, 3 yen, and officers receiving special arrangements for their patronage. Among those who were liberated in the Philippines was a woman named Maria Rosa L. Henson, born on December 5, 1927. Her rescue had actually occurred earlier, accomplished by Filipino guerrilla forces working in coordination with American forces during the preparation for the return to the Philippines. Her ordeal had begun in February 1942, when at the age of 14 she was first assaulted by Japanese soldiers. In April 1943, she was forced into comfort woman service, enduring 9 months of systematic abuse. Philippine guerrillas managed to rescue her in January 1944, as American forces were positioning themselves for their eventual return to the islands. Henson would carry the burden of her experiences in silence for nearly half a century. In 1992, she became the first Philippine woman to speak publicly about having been a comfort woman, breaking decades of silence that had been maintained by shame, stigma, and lack of social support. Her willingness to testify provided crucial documentation about how comfort stations had operated in the Philippines and the role that local guerrilla forces had played in liberation operations. She would later become one of the first recipients of assistance from the Asian Women's Fund project when it began operations in 1996. Her testimony proved invaluable for historians and advocates seeking to understand the full scope of the Comfort Women system. Nothing in American forces' prior experience prepared them for what they discovered when the invasion of Okinawa commenced on April 1, 1945. Intelligence reports had suggested the presence of several comfort stations on the island. The reality vastly exceeded these estimates. Historical documentation would eventually establish that over 145 stations had operated across an island measuring only 70 miles in length. As the Okinawa campaign unfolded, involving major American units including the 1st and 6th Marine Divisions, comfort stations were discovered in virtually every major town and military installation across the island. The city of Naha alone contained 17 former comfort stations, according to military intelligence reports compiled during the campaign. The women found in these facilities included Koreans, Taiwanese, and Okinawans, with ages documented as ranging from as young as 14 years old. The rapid collapse of Japanese resistance in certain sectors led to unexpected discoveries. Near Shuri, the ancient capital of the Ryukyu Kingdom, Marines from the 1st Division discovered cave complexes where Japanese forces had concealed Korean comfort women. According to military reports, these women had been subjected to propaganda claiming that Americans would torture and cannibalize them. This deliberate misinformation was designed to encourage suicide rather than surrender to American forces. Some of the women had been given hand grenades with explicit instructions to kill themselves rather than allow capture by Americans. This psychological warfare continued to affect the women even after physical liberation, as many struggled to overcome the terror that had been deliberately instilled. The scale of documentation required on Okinawa overwhelmed the available translation resources. By May 1945, ATIS had deployed 3 complete translation teams to the island, working to process thousands of documents related to comfort station operations. The bureaucratic detail captured in these documents was staggering. Duty rosters showed women being forced to service 30 to 40 men per day during peak operational periods. Medical records documented forced abortions and sterilization procedures performed without consent. Payment ledgers revealed the military's financial control over every aspect of the system, tracking each transaction and ensuring that women remained trapped in debt bondage regardless of how many men they were forced to service. The Military Intelligence Service, abbreviated as MIS, composed primarily of Nisei Japanese Americans, played an absolutely crucial role in documenting comfort women discoveries throughout the Pacific Theater. The famous unit known as Merrill's Marauders, formerly designated as the 5307 Composite Unit Provisional and commanded by Brigadier General Frank D. Merrill, had operated behind Japanese lines in Burma throughout 1944. This legendary unit included 14 Japanese-American MIS translators, whose skills proved crucial for interrogating captured comfort station personnel and processing documents. After Merrill's Marauders disbanded on August 10, 1944, the Mars Task Force under Brigadier General John P. Willey succeeded them in operations. This new formation included the 475th Infantry and 124th Cavalry Regiment, each supported by teams of 12 Nisei language specialists who continued liberation operations in northern Burma. These translators confronted unprecedented challenges in their work. The women they encountered spoke Korean, Chinese, Tagalog, Indonesian, Dutch, and various regional dialects. Many Korean women had been forbidden to speak their native language for so long under Japanese occupation that they struggled to communicate even with Korean-speaking translators. Cultural barriers made discussion of sexual trauma nearly impossible under the best circumstances. Many women absolutely refused to speak with male translators about what they had endured. The translators processed documents that revealed a disturbing racial hierarchy embedded within the comfort women system. Korean women were classified as Class A. Chinese women were designated Class B. Southeast Asian women fell into Class C. Different stations served different ranks, with officer-only stations maintaining fewer women who faced even more extreme abuse. The documentation revealed rape industrialized according to military rank and racial prejudice, a system that combined sexual violence with the racial ideologies of Japanese militarism. The liberation of the Dutch East Indies, which coincided with Japan's surrender on August 15, 1945, revealed another dimension of the comfort women system that had received less attention. This included the enslavement of European women. Among them was Jan Ruff O'Hearn, born in Java in 1923. She had been forced into a brothel in 1944 at the age of 21. O'Hearn had been taken from Ambarawa internment camp along with 9 other Dutch women in February 1944. These women were held at a comfort station in Semarang for 4 months before being transferred to a camp at Batavia, where they were finally liberated on August 15, 1945. O'Hearn would maintain silence about her experiences for decades. In 1994, she published her memoir titled 50 Years of Silence, breaking the silence that had surrounded European victims of the comfort women system. She testified at a United States congressional hearing in 2007, providing detailed accounts of the systematic nature of Japanese military sexual slavery and how it affected European women as well as Asian women. Her testimony helped establish that the comfort women system had crossed racial boundaries, though the vast majority of victims were Asian women. British and Australian forces, taking control of Indonesia from the Japanese, documented the discovery of comfort stations throughout Java. Australian naval personnel specifically participated in repatriating Indonesian comfort women from Labuan in Borneo. A special camp was established in Bogor in West Java, exclusively for women who had been forced into military brothels, while camps in Batavia processed approximately 10,500 women and children in post-liberation operations. The Dutch military authorities, returning to reclaim their colonial possessions, initially suppressed information about comfort stations involving Dutch women. Records were sealed ostensibly to protect the women's honour, a decision motivated by contemporary social attitudes about sexual violence and female chastity. This suppression would delay justice and recognition for these women for many decades, as evidence remained hidden from public view and historical scrutiny. When Allied medical teams examined liberated comfort women, they documented catastrophic health consequences across the board. According to United States Office of War Information Report No. 49, physical examinations revealed widespread malnutrition comparable to that observed in other prisoners of war, who had experienced average losses of 32% of their body weight during captivity. Sexually transmitted diseases were endemic among the women examined. Military medical reports documented high rates of syphilis and gonorrhea, often inadequately treated with toxic substances like salvarsan and arsphenamine, medications that frequently caused sterility and other serious side effects. Medical teams documented clear evidence of forced abortions, sterilization procedures performed without consent, and severe reproductive damage resulting from repeated sexual assault over extended periods. The medical records revealed systematic brutality on a shocking scale. Women presented with severe malnutrition, with weights of 60 to 70 pounds for individuals whose normal healthy weight should have been 100 to 120 pounds. Diseases of nutritional deficiency were common. Scurvy, beriberi, pellagra, and kwashiorkor were all observed, conditions typically associated with concentration camps and severe deprivation. Military medical personnel provided initial treatment using newly available sulfur drugs and penicillin, representing significant advancement over the medical care available during the war years. However, specialized psychological support for sexual trauma remained virtually non-existent, given the primitive state of psychiatric understanding in the 1940s. Medical personnel documented what they termed hysteria, melancholia, and nervous exhaustion, diagnostic terms that inadequately described what would later be recognized as severe post-traumatic stress disorder. Military doctors' signatures appeared on forced abortion records captured at various locations. One document from a Philippine station showed 15 forced abortions performed in a single month. Sterilization procedures were documented at multiple locations across the theatre. The medical records revealed that comfort women were viewed not as patients requiring care, but as military equipment requiring maintenance to keep them functional for continued sexual service. The United States Army's 164th Signal Photo Company provided crucial visual documentation extending far beyond the Songshan photographs. Signal Corps photographers systematically documented liberated comfort stations across the entire Pacific Theater. They photographed the small cubicles where women were held, military-issue bedding, examination tables, and boxes of military-supplied condoms. These clinical photographs, intended primarily for intelligence purposes, inadvertently created a comprehensive visual record of the infrastructure supporting systematic rape. The images, which remained classified for decades, showed the standardized nature of comfort stations regardless of location. Whether facilities were in the Philippines, Burma, or Pacific Islands, they followed remarkably similar patterns. Converted buildings were divided into small rooms, each barely large enough to accommodate a military cot with communal washing facilities and medical examination rooms. The military precision evident in the setup was apparent in every photograph, revealing the systematic organization underlying the entire system. The photographers documented not just facilities, but the women themselves at the moment of liberation. Their images captured severe malnutrition, untreated injuries, and the 1,000-yard stare characteristic of severe trauma. These photographs, while respecting the women's dignity as much as possible under difficult circumstances, provided irrefutable visual evidence of systematic abuse that could not be denied or explained away. The United Nations Relief and Rehabilitation Administration, abbreviated as UNRWA and established in November 1943, managed the massive repatriation effort that followed liberation. With 11,000 staff members by 1946, UNRWA operated hundreds of displaced persons camps across former occupied territories. Between May and June 1945 alone, the Supreme Headquarters Allied Expeditionary Force repatriated 5,250,000 displaced persons at an astounding rate of 80,000 individuals per day. However, comfort women were processed within general civilian populations without specialized care tailored to their unique needs and trauma. Their ambiguous status, fitting into neither prisoners of war, civilian internees, nor military personnel categories, affected everything from medical care priority to transportation arrangements. This bureaucratic limbo meant many women received only minimal assistance despite their severe trauma and complex needs. Many women simply couldn't or wouldn't return home after liberation. Research documents specific cases that illustrate this tragedy. Bai Bongi remained in Okinawa after liberation, classified as a stateless Korean under United States military rule. She later became an illegal alien when Okinawa was returned to Japanese control in 1972. Korean women in China lost their native language over decades of isolation from their homeland. Some married locally for protection and survival, unable to contemplate returning to families who might reject them. The American Red Cross, with 7,500,000 volunteers and 39,000 paid staff at its peak in 1945, provided comfort items and non-medical support through programs like the Grey Ladies, who offered psychological first aid to displaced persons. However, language barriers and profound cultural differences limited effectiveness. The organizational focus remained on rapid repatriation rather than addressing long-term trauma. Few understood the specialized needs of sexual trauma survivors or how to provide appropriate care. Cultural stigma presented insurmountable barriers for many comfort women attempting to rebuild their lives. In Confucian societies spanning Korea, China, and Japan, female chastity was considered paramount to family honor. Women who had been raped, regardless of circumstances, brought perceived shame to their families. Many families preferred to believe their daughters had died rather than accept they had been comfort women. The Catholic Philippines presented similar challenges, with sexual abuse victims facing severe social ostracism. Indonesian Muslim communities struggled to accept women who had been forcibly defiled, viewing them as damaged regardless of the involuntary nature of what they had endured. The International Military Tribunal for the Far East's handling of comfort women represents a profound and tragic failure of post-war justice. Despite extensive proceedings running from April 29, 1946 to November 12, 1948, involving 419 witnesses and 1,336 exhibits, the tribunal made only one direct reference to forced prostitution. This lone mention concerned the Chinese city of Guilin, where Japanese forces had recruited women for labor on the pretext of establishing factories and then forced the women thus recruited into prostitution. The crucial legal precedent came instead from the Dutch Batavia Temporary Court-Martial, which conducted 4 out of 171 total cases specifically addressing forced prostitution between August 1946 and December 1949. The Semarang incident verdict, delivered on February 14, 1948, saw Army Major Okada sentenced to death with 11 others receiving sentences ranging from 2 to 20 years for forcing approximately 35 Dutch women from concentration camps into comfort stations. Documents discovered in April 2007 by researchers Yoshimi Yoshiaki and Hirofumi Hayashi revealed that the Tokyo Trials archives had contained 7 official documents showing that the Tokeitai, the naval military police, had forced women into frontline brothels in China, Indochina, and Indonesia. These documents had been available to prosecutors, but remained unprosecuted for 60 years, sitting in archives while survivors lived without acknowledgement or justice. The failure to prosecute these crimes sent an unmistakable message that sexual slavery was not considered sufficiently significant to warrant serious legal consequences. This decision would haunt survivors for decades, denying them recognition and justice while perpetrators lived freely, often returning to respectable positions in post-war Japanese society. For 46 years after liberation, comfort women remained history's hidden victims. Government compensation programs directed funding toward recognized prisoners of war and civilian internees, but comfort women, unclassified and unacknowledged by official categories, received nothing. The silence was maintained by all interested parties. The Japanese government systematically destroyed records and denied responsibility. Allied governments classified documents and avoided asking embarrassing questions that might complicate diplomatic relations. Asian governments focused on economic development over advocacy for victims. Survivors themselves remained silent, frightened, and ashamed. The breakthrough came through extraordinary courage displayed by survivors themselves. On August 14, 1991, Kim Hak-soon became the first woman to publicly identify herself as a former comfort woman. Her press conference opened the floodgates, allowing survivors across Asia to finally speak out about experiences they had hidden for nearly half a century. Though the specific details of her liberation remain less thoroughly documented in available records, her courage in speaking publicly triggered a wave of testimonies that would validate the documentary evidence American forces had gathered decades earlier. In January 1992, historian Yoshimi Yoshiaki made a discovery at Japan's defense agency, National Institute of Defense Studies archives, that would fundamentally transform understanding of the comfort women system. He uncovered documents providing the first definitive documented evidence of direct Japanese military involvement. These included military orders explicitly directing the establishment of comfort stations and regulations, demonstrating direct military control and supervision of operations. The Shanghai Expeditionary Force Diary from 1932 contained an entry by Senior Staff Officer Okabe Naosaburo, describing the establishment of the very first comfort station during the Shanghai incident. These documentary discoveries proved what survivors had testified but had been disbelieved for decades. The comfort women system was official military policy implemented at the highest levels, not merely the actions of rogue units or individual soldiers acting independently. Following Kim Hak-soon's groundbreaking testimony, other survivors began finding the courage to speak publicly. Lee Yong-soo, taken as a teenager from Daegu, Korea, testified before the United States House of Representatives Foreign Relations Committee in 2007. Her testimony, along with that of 2 other survivors, resulted in the passage of United States House Resolution 121, urging Japan to accept full responsibility for the Comfort Women system and issue official apologies to survivors. Park Young-sim, the pregnant woman captured in the famous Songshan photograph that had circulated for decades without identification, testified at the Women's International War Crimes Tribunal held in Tokyo in the year 2000. She finally put a name and personal story to one of the war's most iconic and haunting images. She described being taken at age 17 and enduring 3 years of sexual slavery before her liberation at Songshan. In 2003, she visited and personally identified the Nanjing Lijixiang Comfort Station site, where she had been enslaved before being moved to Songshan. Kang Il-chul, forcibly taken to China in 1943, found herself unable to return to Korea after the war ended. She remained in China working as a nurse, separated permanently from her homeland. She visited the United States multiple times to promote awareness of the Comfort Women issue. Her painting titled Girls Being Burnt became the motif for the feature film Spirit's Homecoming, bringing her experience and that of other survivors to broader audiences. Her experience highlighted the long-term displacement and permanent exile caused by the Comfort Women system for many survivors. The 1990s and 2000s witnessed explosive archival discoveries worldwide. American archives yielded previously declassified Signal Corps photographs showing comfort stations across the Pacific, medical reports detailing systematic abuse, and intelligence documents revealing the military infrastructure supporting sexual slavery. Between 2014 and 2015, Chinese archives released over 90 documents from Kwantung Army Military Police Corps archives held in Jilin Province. These documents provided hard evidence of the Japanese army serving as the funding agency for purchasing comfort women, with detailed records from puppet regime banks in Manchuria documenting payments for what was euphemistically termed special personnel procurement. Professor Su Jiliang's extensive research indicated that approximately 200,000 Chinese women alone had been forced into comfort stations, with Chinese women comprising 36% of all comfort women, according to demographic analyses. The geographic spread of stations was staggering. They operated in Japan itself, throughout China, across the Philippines, in Indonesia, Malaysia, Thailand, Burma, New Guinea, Hong Kong, Macau, French Indochina, Korea, and Taiwan, demonstrating the system's vast territorial reach across the entire Japanese empire. The demographic breakdown revealed the system's embedded racial hierarchy with disturbing clarity. Koreans comprised 51.8% of comfort women. Chinese women represented 36%. Japanese women accounted for 12.2%. Others included Filipino, Taiwanese, Indonesian, Burmese, Dutch, and Australian women. The systematic nature extended deeply into military organization itself. High Command issued establishment orders. Regional staff officers created operational plans. Local military police provided direct oversight. Military doctors conducted regular examinations of the women. Among the most chilling discoveries were disposal orders found at several locations as researchers combed through archives. These documents, issued as Allied forces approached Japanese positions, ordered the special disposal of comfort women to prevent their capture and potential testimony. Multiple massacre sites discovered in the Philippines and elsewhere provided grim confirmation that these orders had been carried out. At Mapaniki village in the Philippines, the November 23, 1944 incident involved Japanese forces attempting to eliminate comfort women before American forces arrived. Similar incidents were documented across the Pacific as Japanese forces retreated. The extraordinarily high mortality rate among comfort women, estimated at 75% by historians studying the system, reflected not merely harsh conditions but deliberate killing to prevent testimony about what had occurred. These disposal orders represented the Japanese military's explicit recognition that comfort women were witnesses to war crimes. The systematic attempt to eliminate them before Allied liberation demonstrated consciousness of guilt and illustrated the lengths to which Japanese forces would go to prevent exposure of the comfort women system to the outside world. Japanese propaganda significantly complicated and impeded liberation efforts across the theatre. Women had been repeatedly told that Americans would torture and cannibalize them if captured. British accounts from Burma reported that Korean comfort women expressed astonishment upon learning that British forces were not going to eat them. This deliberately instilled terror made initial liberation contacts both difficult and dangerous for advancing Allied forces. The propaganda served dual purposes. It prevented escape attempts during captivity, while simultaneously encouraging suicide rather than capture by Allied forces. Multiple reports documented women being given grenades with explicit instructions to kill themselves rather than be taken alive by Americans. This psychological warfare continued affecting women long after physical liberation occurred, as many struggled to overcome the terror that had been systematically instilled over years. The effectiveness of this propaganda revealed itself repeatedly in liberation operations across the Pacific. Women hid from liberating forces, attempted suicide when approached, or remained in comfort stations even after Japanese forces had fled the area. The psychological conditioning was so complete and thorough that many women initially couldn't comprehend that Allied forces actually intended to help rather than harm them. As occupation forces spread across Japan proper in late 1945, they discovered evidence that the comfort women system had extended into the home islands themselves. Military authorities found documentation of comfort stations operating within Japan, serving training bases and military installations. More disturbing still was the discovery that Japanese authorities had prepared similar facilities specifically for anticipated occupation forces. The Recreation and Amusement Association had been established before American forces arrived, recruiting thousands of Japanese women as what were termed special entertainers. General MacArthur's immediate ban on these facilities reflected both moral objections and public health concerns about sexually transmitted diseases, though enforcement of this ban varied considerably across different locations and units. Navy documentation revealed that the Japanese military had maintained detailed statistical records on comfort women throughout the entire war. These documents, quickly classified by American authorities, revealed the truly massive scale of the system. The bureaucratic precision evident in registration forms, medical inspection schedules, and financial records demonstrated that sexual slavery had been integrated into military operations at every organizational level. One of the most significant gaps in the historical record remains the relative absence of detailed first-hand accounts from American soldiers who actually liberated comfort women. The Library of Congress Veterans History Project, National World War II Museum collections, and military historical records reveal surprisingly minimal documentation from the perspectives of liberating soldiers themselves. Several factors explain this conspicuous absence. Japanese military forces systematically destroyed records at war's end. The comfort women issue remained deeply taboo for decades after 1945. American military documentation prioritized tactical operations and combat actions over social encounters. Many comfort women died during the war or were killed by retreating Japanese forces before liberation could occur. The silence from American military personnel reflected both the shocking nature of what they had discovered and the complete lack of any framework for understanding systematic sexual slavery on this scale. The military establishment had well-developed protocols for liberating prisoners of war and civilian internees, but absolutely no procedures existed for handling victims of organized rape. This institutional gap contributed significantly to the decades-long invisibility of comfort women's experiences in both official records and public consciousness. From 1945 through 1991, comfort women remained history's hidden victims. Government compensation programs directed funds toward recognized prisoners of war and civilian internees, but comfort women falling outside classification systems and remaining unacknowledged received nothing whatsoever. The silence was maintained collectively by all parties involved. The Japanese government destroyed records and consistently denied responsibility. Allied governments kept documents classified and avoided asking embarrassing questions. Asian governments focused on economic development over advocacy for victims. Survivors remained silent, trapped by fear and shame. The breakthrough moment arrived through survivors' extraordinary courage. Following Kim Hak-soon's testimony in 1991, the Women's International War Crimes Tribunal, held in Tokyo in the year 2000, provided a formal forum where 64 survivors from 8 different countries could finally provide formal legal testimony. Though the tribunal lacked binding legal authority, it created a comprehensive testimonial record that validated decades of hidden suffering. United States House Resolution 121, passed in 2007, officially recognized Comfort Women's suffering and urged Japan to formally acknowledge and apologize for its role. This recognition, arriving 62 years after liberation, demonstrated just how extraordinarily long the journey from physical rescue to official acknowledgement had been for these women. Modern retrospective studies of Comfort Women survivors reveal shocking statistics about long-term psychological impact. 90% showed lifetime prevalence of post-traumatic stress disorder. 65% exhibited current symptoms decades after their experiences. These rates proved significantly higher than even Holocaust survivors, who showed 39% prevalence. These statistics validate the severe psychological trauma that military medical personnel had documented but poorly understood back in 1945. The systematic nature of the Comfort Women system revealed itself in multiple dimensions. Operations spanned from 1932 through 1945 across territories encompassing the entire Japanese Empire. Standardized regulations were replicated across thousands of individual facilities. Military logistics involving transportation, medical services, and financial management supported the entire infrastructure. Racial hierarchies were deliberately embedded in operational procedures at every level. The numbers alone tell a story of industrial-scale sexual slavery implemented with military precision and bureaucratic efficiency. The very comprehensiveness of the system, its meticulous documentation, standardization, and enormous scale ultimately became the evidence that would eventually prove its existence despite decades of sustained denial. The evidence survived despite systematic attempts at destruction and denial. Military translators' reports, Signal Corps photographs, medical records, and intelligence documents created an archive that couldn't be completely eliminated. When survivors finally found the courage to speak decades later, their testimonies precisely matched records buried in classified files, providing independent verification that transformed hidden history into acknowledged truth. Every captured regulation, every photographed comfort station, every translated document contributed incrementally to building an undeniable evidentiary case. The bureaucratic precision that the Japanese military applied to organizing sexual slavery became, ironically, the very evidence proving systematic war crimes. The documents meant to organize exploitation became proof of atrocity. The American soldiers who discovered comfort stations during their advance through the Pacific probably never imagined that their routine documentation would become crucial evidence in a decades-long struggle for truth and recognition. Their photographs, reports, and translations created an extensive archive that survived determined attempts at denial and forgetting. What seemed at the time like routine military documentation ultimately became historical evidence demanding acknowledgement. As of 2024, fewer than 20 Korean Comfort Women survivors remained alive. Their testimonies, now validated by documentary evidence that American forces created during liberation operations, stand as irrefutable proof of systematic war crimes. Comfort Women statues now stand in locations worldwide, serving as silent testimony to suffering that was denied and hidden for far too long. The Comfort Women discovered by American forces during Pacific War operations represented one of history's largest and most systematic programs of sexual slavery. The liberation of these women, thoroughly documented in military reports, photographs, and testimonies, provided crucial evidence that nevertheless took decades to achieve full acknowledgement. The systematic nature evident in standardized regulations, military transportation networks, medical infrastructure, and financial systems proved conclusively that this was official policy implemented at the highest levels, not merely battlefield excess or individual crimes. The failure to immediately recognize and address comfort women as a distinct category of victim, despite the reports filed by intelligence officers and medical records created by military doctors, reflects the limitations of contemporary understanding. Nevertheless, all these documents confirm what survivors insisted for decades. The liberation that American forces provided between 1944 and 1945 began a process that continues even today, with remaining survivors still seeking full acknowledgement and official apology from the Japanese government. This historical episode teaches profound lessons about war, trauma, and justice. Physical liberation doesn't automatically equal psychological freedom. Rescue without recognition perpetuates suffering rather than ending it. Documentation without prosecution enables denial to flourish. The American forces who encountered comfort women faced something utterly beyond their training or comprehension, yet their careful documentation created a historical record that would eventually support justice efforts decades later. The women American forces liberated from comfort stations between 1944 and 1945 initially couldn't believe that liberation was real. Their trauma ran far deeper than mere physical captivity. They had been told repeatedly that they were worthless, that death was preferable to their shame, that no one would ever accept them again. Liberation challenged these deeply internalized beliefs, creating cognitive dissonance that many survivors never fully resolved even decades later. The documentary evidence ranging from report number 49 to the Songshan photographs, from ATIS translations to Signal Corps images, provides absolutely irrefutable proof of systematic war crimes. The bureaucratic precision of Japanese military sexual slavery, meticulously captured in Allied intelligence files, simply cannot be denied by any honest examination of the evidence. As the last survivors inevitably pass away, their testimonies become ever more precious, supported by every document, photograph, and report that American forces created during liberation operations. The comfort women who struggled to believe in their liberation understood a profound truth that transcended their immediate circumstances. True freedom required not just removing chains, but rebuilding shattered humanity. It demanded not just opening doors, but acknowledging what had happened behind them. It meant not just surviving, but being believed. Their decades-long fight for recognition continues the liberation process that American soldiers began 80 years ago. Today, the evidence stands clear, the testimonies are confirmed, the systematic nature is proven beyond any reasonable doubt. The journey from physical liberation to full recognition represents one of history's longest struggles for justice, a fight supported by the extensive archive of truth that American forces created when they first encountered the unbelievable reality of Japan's comfort women system. The initial disbelief that these women expressed at liberation reflected their profound understanding that freedom from captivity was merely the beginning of a much longer and more difficult journey toward justice, recognition, and healing that continues to this very day. The American soldiers who discovered these women documented one of history's largest systematic war crimes. In preserving evidence of atrocity, they performed a service extending far beyond normal military duty. They bore witness to truth that demanded acknowledgement, even if that acknowledgement would require decades to achieve. The comfort women's story challenges all of us to confront deeply uncomfortable truths about war, gender, and justice. It reminds us that liberation is never merely a single moment, but rather an ongoing process. For these women, that process remains incomplete even as their numbers inevitably dwindle, and time runs out for full justice to be served to those who survived to tell their stories.